Alright, so since y'all seem to enjoy my half-assed weapon testing versus enemy vehicles, I decided to put slightly more effort into this variant. By effort, I mean I dredged all the way through the opening encounter of Vesper's Host to get the first CP to test a modified set of weapons versus BRIGG. So not the exact same set, not the exact same rolls. I'm obviously embellishing the amount of effort that it took, but I heard you guys in the comments the last video telling me to test this and that and the other thing with a special amount of emphasis on exotic weapons like Parasite, Legend of Acris, etc. I'm not saying I don't want to test exotics, but the point of the last video and this one as well is to test weapons that that I farmed the crap out of or crafted myself and invested a lot of materials into. Specifically, as I mentioned in the last video, weapons with perks designed for countering enemy vehicles and constructs such as deconstruct and hack a breach armaments. In fact, you won't see a single weapon in this test without at least one of those perks, if not both. Alright, so BRIGGs are fun, they're tough to crack open, but then you get that juicy crit, so this means that you can use different weapons and get much different outcomes than the testing I did versus the Thresher on Neomuna. You can very likely take this information here and apply it to Grandmaster level BRIGGs, such as the one in the opening Exodus Crash, Devil's Lair, or even Expert 0 Hour. Where else would we come across BRIGGs? Let me know in the comments. The weapons I decided to showcase here were narrowed down after some preliminary testing, just like the last video, where I forgot to mention that I actually tested around 20 weapons before narrowing down to the show-worthy ones, so to speak. I kicked some of the competition out early for poor performance or awkward usability, such as using a shotgun or a glaive while getting constantly stomped away by the BRIGG, for example. Okay, so what are the weapons here? I'm going to discuss them in no particular order to leave you in suspense, but or you can just skip straight to the timestamps to get to the bottom of it. First of all, Mountaintop. Instead of using revision 0 as a benchmark like I did in the last video, I went with Mountaintop because it typically performs quite well versus BRIGGs, and it stays on theme with being a bespoke legendary weapon. Masterwork and fully enhanced is, what I mean by that. It had the slowest time to kill or TTK in this test, and it just gives you a simple point of reference to compare to the other 6 weapons I used here. Of those 6, 2 are special weapons, 4 are heavy. Again, I'll get to each one in a second, so stay tuned. Secondly, though, as far as I chose how to test here, unlike the Neomuna version versus the Thresher where I used Hunter with Certarachne to stay alive and Marksman's Dodge for the occasional reload, this time I went with Warlock on Dawnblade because the BRIGG is slower to take down and there's an absolute ton of enemies, so I just popped down a well. Got the kill within the Well of Radiance, and so this means Radiant was up the entire time for all tests, so at least it's universal. Again, no other non-artifact related buffs were used to increase weapon damage such as surges or weaken, just Radiant. Also, all artifact mods were meant to be disabled to avoid things like extra shatter damage from chill clip or arc damage from blind or tremors on GLs. However, I realized after the fact that I completely forgot to disable the artifact, so the results of this test are actually skewed in favor of the artifact, namely heavy grenade launchers. If you remember the last video, Tinasha's Mastery was actually tied or even slightly ahead of Edge Transit versus the Thresher, which is quite shocking. In this case, heavy GLs kind of blow everything out of the water. Not to spoil anything, but I may have been getting weakened on top of the tremors, so yeah, it's definitely skewed. So hopefully you don't mind this bias, but I don't think the results would have been, a whole lot different, and at least you know about it. Okay, so I'll get into the weapons next, and then the testing. You check the timestamps. Alright, so the weapons themselves, I didn't verbally break them down in the last video, which I could have done. I know it makes the video a little bit longer, but this gives you a little bit more information or my thoughts on it. So, and I just double checked the artifact. I was not using concussive reload, so there was definitely no weaken going on with the heavy GLs or anything. There was just kinetic impacts on the heavy GLs and Hail to Storm on my chill clip Tinasha's Mastery. Blinding didn't do anything because I wasn't using arc compounding, and because the only arc weapon that I was using was Line in the Sand, and there was basically no crits involved until the BRIGG's faceplate was broken off, and then it was basically a one or two shot at that point anyway. So yeah, it was just the heavy GLs and Tinasha's. So the weapons, I guess I could start with the heavy GLs. Marsilion-C, this came out in Season of Defiant. It rolls with Envious Assassin. You can get Explosive Light, you can get Cascade Point. Explosive light is a massive damage buff on grenade launchers. It's like 50 or 60%, but of course you only get up to 6 explosive light shots on a non-enhanced explosive light perk. If it's enhanced, you can get 7, but still, when you scale the amount of reserves you get on a heavy GL, it's just a portion of your reserves compared to something like a rocket launcher, where almost the majority of your rockets can benefit from explosive light. So I thought it'd be fun to use Envious and Cascade because I can't remember exactly how many seconds Cascade lasts for, but basically if you have Envious Assassin, you can capitalize on Cascade Point without ever having to reload, right? So if you didn't have like Envious Assassin, you just had a standard mag size, your Cascade Point would technically still be going, but while you're reloading, by the time you're done reloading, Cascade Point will have ended, so you're not capitalizing, right? So these two perks synergize well together. I was able to, in this test, I think, get up to 24 grenades in the grenade launcher at one time. And of course, it's a Hack Breach, right? That's why it's in the test here. So this did surprisingly well, and I've got mini frags on there, so that adds a little bit of extra damage. Not quite as much as Spike, but either of those perks are pretty relevant. I mean, like 2% extra damage is kind of a non-factor. It's definitely not going to change the TTK by anything meaningful, whatever. So yeah, I tested that. I tested Speleologist again. This one came up as number 1 in the test versus the Threshers, taking the Thresher down in substantially more or faster time than the other weapons, with Deconstruct and Surrounded, right? So 40% buff plus a 45 or 47% buff. I can never remember the exact number on the enhanced variant of Surrounded. I think it's 47%. So multiplicatively, you're probably looking at like upwards of a 90% damage buff, right? So not to spoil anything, this performed very well in this test as well, so you'll see the outcome shortly. Line in the sand, again, this was kind of at the bottom. The problem with the Briggs is, and with many vehicles, is the lack of a crit spot, right? So linear fusion rifles are just not very good for non-crit related enemies. However, it is still a double damage perk with Deconstruct and Bait and Switch, right? 40% and 30%. So that is pretty much it is the highest damage buff that you can get on any legendary linear fusion rifle, and especially so for vehicles, obviously, right? I didn't explain in this video exactly what Deconstruct does, but I did in the last video, and many of you probably know. But right, aside from the 40% damage buff that you get versus enemies, it reloads your magazine as you do damage, which means that you can avoid having to reload and you can get a faster time to kill, right? Edge Transit. So this is my shiny variant that I haven't used very much, as you could probably see from the kill count here, 15. But this is a very good roll. It's a double damage perk, so unlike the Envious Assassin and Deconstruct Edge Transit that I tested on the Threshers, I decided to use this one here, and it's not because I was trying to leave it out of the previous test for any kind of bias or anything like that. It's just I forgot about it, and I'm not overly familiar with Cascade Point. Like, I haven't used Cascade Point a lot, but it turns out it's actually very easy to use. You just get one kill and Cascade Point will be ready, so that when you swap to this, you get that, 30% increased rate of fire. So it is not like a damage perk in itself, but it is a damage over time, it is a DPS increase, right? It is a major DPS increase, so 30% and 40%. So this did very well in this test here. Okay, so that covers the heavies. Then I said I got 2 specials, right? We used 6 weapons. The benchmark that I used here before I get into the other specials, Mountaintop with spike grenades and hard launch and demo and frenzy. I've talked about this Mountaintop at length in previous videos, but you likely haven't seen those, or you've probably forgot. Frenzy is it is the highest damage perk that you can get on Mountaintop for sustained damage, right? It's 15% extra damage. It maxes your reload, which increases your DPS, and it works on every single shot, unlike recombination, right? So, I mean, just for doing sustained damage, this is basically, you know, the best role that I have for taking out Briggs. Demo is a nice little free reload every now and then. If you don't have Demo, something like Impulse Amplifier or even Vorpal would also work equally as well, right? So that was the benchmark that I used there. Tinasha's Mastery, the same one that I used in the previous video. I do have the air trigger roll as well, but I find myself using Deconstruct more often, especially if ammo is easy enough for me to come by, like if I'm using special finishers on my build, etc. But yeah, Chill Clip, you know, I mean, that gives you quite a lot of extra damage just from the shatter, right? Like, it's probably not anywhere comparable to a traditional damage perk, such as Surrounded, which, by the way, I did test Deconstruct and Surrounded because I have that role as well. And but the thing is, it's not bespoke, it's not masterworked, it's not fully enhanced. So even at that, it didn't really perform any better than this version. But nonetheless, this still kept up with the heavy weapons, which is quite surprising, but didn't perform as well as it did in the previous video. Then Naeem's Lance. This was very well. It performed very well as a sniper rifle. I have tested the Albruna D. Because it's a Hackett Breach from Gambit. I have Valletta, but I don't have an enhanced Valletta yet because I don't have the god roll that I've been searching for, which is Withering Gaze and Deconstruct, or Withering Gaze and Explosive Payload. But obviously, to test versus enemies or for vehicles, I would use Deconstruct and Withering Gaze. I don't have that roll, right? But this is a rapid fire frame sniper rifle, so it is just generally the better archetype for sustained damage, and it performs surprisingly well here, right? So you got Reconstruction to overload the magazine. I can't even remember if I actually let Reconstruction fully max out my reserves before I started the test. That's something I should have paid more attention to, but nonetheless, I think I had one reload in there. So Reconstruction obviously reloads your magazine in the background, it overflows it, and then Deconstruct does the same thing as you do sustained damage, feeding ammo back into the magazine. So you can really put down a ton of sustained damage even without a damage perk. But obviously we're getting the 40% because we're up against vehicles here. I'm just saying, generally speaking, this is a good sniper rifle, right? And that's basically it. So let's get into the test next, and you'll see the numbers there. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, let me know in the comments. We can have a discussion about it in there. If you have any ideas for another video, let me know. And I wish you all a Merry Christmas. And I'll try to see if I can get out another video before the new year. If I don't, have a happy new year as well, and hopefully 2025 brings us some fresh Destiny content and kind of revitalizes the game a little bit. Anyways, take care, see you next time.